Tonight on Sources, we feature a powerhouse in Caribbean journalism, Nazima Raghubir. A respected broadcast journalist based here in Guyana, Nazima has spent her entire professional life in media as a writer, reporter, managing editor, and news presenter. From her early days at Prime News to her leadership roles at the Guyana Press Association and the Association of Caribbean Media Workers, she has consistently championed press freedom and journalistic integrity. In 2018, Nazima made history as the first woman to lead the Guyana Press Association. Beyond her leadership, Nazima is known for her deep commitment to mentoring young journalists and supporting human rights. She has authored and edited key publications, including a guide to the Parliament of Guyana, and has contributed to influential reports on the state of Caribbean media and the growing threats of misinformation. Nazima Raghubir joins us now on Sources, a journalist, a mentor, and a regional voice for press freedom. Welcome to Sources. I'm your host, 𝗦𝗢𝗨𝗥𝗖𝗍𝗵. Tonight, I have a very special guest, Miss Nazima Raghubir, the president of the Guyana Press Association. As you know, on May 3rd, we celebrated World Press Freedom Day, and so I decided to feature Nazima today on this edition of Sources. Nazima, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations to you, 𝗦𝗢𝗨, and Andre, behind the scenes, and Gordon Mosley for this fantastic program. In fact, since you launched it, I've been sharing it on my page.
Thank you so much.
And when I don't, like I didn't last week because I was not here, I got queries as to
what's wrong?
Sources is on. So congratulations to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the support. Nazima, you started off in media more than 20 years ago. That's a long time. What sparked your interest?
Look, I was 17 at the time. I wanted to do something different. I had just left high school, haven't written A-levels at that time, and I wanted to do something different. I was heavily inspired by what I was reading at that time and what I studied. I studied history and literature. I spent a considerable amount of time, and this is probably going to shock a lot of people, at 13 and 14 reading about Marxism and, you know, socialism, and I was so interested in what was going on. Obviously, I was a little bit naive, but what I wanted was to try something different. Somebody had said to me at the time, my godfather is Adam Harris, why don't you reach out to Prime News? And I took my application into Prime News, which was on Church Street, owned by the late Dr. Frank Beckles, managed by Julia Johnson, and editor Adam Harris. I don't ever think Adam asked me or looked at my CV, but I know he said, come back tomorrow, which was the next day, and that was my introduction into journalism. It's so interesting because I had to repeat this story recently. When I entered that newsroom, that was just around the murder of 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 in Buxton, and then the other murders that happened, the officer that was involved in the black clothes police squad. And so my entry had me understudying a lot of press conferences and so on, and at that time, Mr. Harris took me to Cabinet Secretary post-Cabinet press briefing, Dr. Luncheon. And then I would have seen a lot of the people that I basically read in a newspaper and I was seeing in TV at that time at this press conference. And I had to sit next to Mr. Harris and take notes of, you know, what was being discussed and so on. I remember when we were leaving, he said, did you take your notes? And I said, yes. And then he said, well, you can tell me what you thought was the highlight. And it was interesting because what I had identified as the highlight was basically the state's response at that time to 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's murder. And I had to take that information, and 𝗬𝗎𝗎𝗂, who had brought a legal action against the police at the time, was holding a press conference at the then WPA's office on Church Street. And because I had taken such copious notes, Mr. Harris, so well, you can go and ask Mr. Guyana, who is making this statement at X time, you know, about what was said this morning and questions of the press release. So that was it. Let me tell you something. I mean, entering into the media was so interesting at that time because we were not sent to assignments. I know reporters are accustomed to being sent on assignments. As a rookie reporter, we had to go in with 3 story ideas. You had to have your researched information. We didn't have access to the internet as we did, you know, widely then. And you basically had to know what you were going for and your focus on. So when I eventually did my story, which was a tape 2 story. Back in the days, you had VHS. Tape 1 is what lead off the newscast. Tape 2, you have your tape 3 for any emergency stories in your sport. It was on who had responsibility for fire hydrants. And it took me about 3 weeks to gather all the interviews, do the research and so on. I was proud of my tape 2 story. So that is my long story of my entry into the media.
Well, was it challenging at first? Gathering the information, getting people to speak to you, building that trust? Were you nervous during the initial stage? I know, you know, as a young journalist, sometimes you get sent to press conferences and you have your questions written down, but, you know, just to speak it out is a challenge. Did you find that challenging?
Not necessarily that part. The part that was a little bit challenging at the beginning was that I ended up having to anchor the news, and the news was live, and I had to get accustomed to that. But that part of like doing the research, I think like that was my calling, and you know, going out and talking to people was also my calling. And this is the commitment I made to myself. Like, I accepted every assignment thrown my way. One, because if an assignment is thrown your way, then you know, well, you get something in the can and then you can work on and whatnot. So I did everything from presentations to what was considered not the big assignments that the big reporters didn't want. I was on it. And I wanted to do that because I really wanted to learn and I wanted to make my own connections. And that allowed me a lot to like have sources from all over this country, meet people from all over this country, and to develop that type of relationship, because you give people, we didn't have cell phones, was office phone, you give people the number, and when things happen, that is how you got the information, because people call and say, look, this has happened and I have this. Do you know about this? Have you heard about this? And that's what, you know, built my relationship. And I had some of the most amazing mentors in the name of Adam Harris and Julia Johnson, who worked with us on our stories. We had a very packed newsroom of reporters where we had healthy competition, and people like the late Mondale Smith. You know, Mondale was a force to be reckoned with. We had Melissa, Walton. We had so many other people who also passed through Prime News, but you had the foundation members. I had some of the amazing support from the videographers and video editors. I don't think I could have done it without people like Isan Griffith, Olson Monroe, and also there's a name of a video, Bevan, who the original evening news folks, and Andre would remember them. These guys had an eye for news, and even I would be with them on interviews and so on, and they would be listening and they would be connected to that interview, and they would ask questions which assisted me in understanding or maybe getting out something that I didn't get before, and also helping me with my shots, because when you're working with a videographer, you're working as a team. And they were instrumental. I could remember like Isan and I walking down the road, and he was like, you know, that man talk about this. Maybe if you do a follow-up story, these are the shots, I can take these shots and so on. And they did. And even my video editor at the time, and we've had so many video editors after Bevan, Wesley, there was Miguel Bacchus, who worked for such a long time with Prime News, who would say, you know, I think I need a better shot of this, and I think this shot would better work with this type of thing. Back in those days, you had to write out your script. You had to write out, Ms. Johnson taught me how to do a storyboard, and I had to draw up a storyboard. And next to your storyboard, if you had a sentence for a story, you had to put in the cover shots that you wanted, but you had to put in the tape number and the time the video editor could find that shot. And if you didn't get that, some editors throw out your story until you get it right. But those were the people who I worked with that has set the bar so high for me in journalism.
What are some of the lessons learned more than 20 years after, you know, what are some of the takeaways?
Yeah, I actually did a presentation on this yesterday on ethical journalism, but more so how a lot of my tactics have changed over the time. I joined journalism at a time when we had the crime spree, and it was a very bloody period, but it was also a period where you wanted to be you wanted to be there, you wanted to capture what was going on, and you wanted to disseminate what was going on to the public. And I had internalized a lot of the trauma then and shelved that trauma. We had access to Dr. Beckles, one of the country's leading psychiatrists at the time, and I remember we had discussed this time and time again. But if you tell a young reporter not to do something, it's highly likely that they're going to do it because their focus is on getting the story. I have taken so many steps back from that, especially when I am reporting on traumatic situations. I do ask people, do you really want to talk about this now? Do you want me to give you some time? Ideally, probably years ago, I would not have done that. I would have gone for the interview, and without realizing that them talking to me is also you know, they're still processing the types of information that was before them. And so, I mean, for those things, I think I would probably have done them differently had I, you know what I know today and so on. But I want to say that even with that said, there were a lot of people who depended on the media and still depend on the media to tell their stories. People still do call and say, look, I'm not getting water, I ain't getting this, I gotta wait at the hospital for such a long time. You know, there's been a sexual assault and I can't get this matter properly reported, and you know, there's still those things that are happening that people call that they used to before. But I just think I deal with them a lot differently now than I would have years ago. And there's some stories, Svetlana, that have really shaped a lot of things that I think about us as a people. Like, Guyanese are so strong. We have lived through many trying times that sometimes you have to really commend people for that level of strength that they got. I always remember that I never saw this story in the office when it was being edited, and the first time I would have seen it was when I was anchoring the news. And it was a story where a young child had gotten electrocuted in either Durban Street or Hatfield Street. They lived in this house, and at the bottom of the house was there was no occupation there, but something was running across at the bottom of their house with illegal electricity. And she went onto the house for something and got electrocuted. And the father gave an interview, and in that interview, he said he had $100 in his pocket the morning, and he was deciding whether or not to use his $100 for to go to work or to give her to go to school. And he decided to use it to go to work and let she stay home for the day, because he had to make that decision, and you know, he regretted. And I remember my mom watching the news, and when I went home, she said, I could tell, you know, it just upset me. Like, you see those realities, you cover those realities, you meet people every day that have to make these decisions, and then that story always stuck with me.
And I'm going to ask also, you spoke about that story, the little girl being electrocuted, but is there any other story that you would say would be your most memorable or most impactful story? I know you've done plenty, but what comes to mind now?
Interestingly, I did a lot of political reporting, Parliament was my beat. Those stories are not the stories that I consider memorable. They're always the stories where I connected with people and, either met them at a personal level to try to follow up on a particular story or do. These are the stories that have always stayed with me. 𝗧𝗢𝗏 Grant's murder in Agricola in 2012. Having covered that story, the fact that 𝗧𝗢𝗏 was placed to lie on the ground and he was executed, a child his mother sent to the shop. Everything that happened along that line, and having met Shawnette, who is now passed away, and her entire family from Agricola. That's one of the stories that stuck with me for a very long time, because I have seen and covered the types of things that was happening. There's a story that, as always, I think about from time to time. There was a former politician who was accused of rape of a minor. And I remember that doing that interview with that person. She is a grown woman now, in the company of a sister and a couple of other organizations who wanted to assist her. And just hearing the types of things that were that had happened as part of this rape for years, and talking to my editor about getting the story out there and how we were going to deal with it and so on. Everything else that happened with that story, including people taking the side of this man, labeling him, X, and labeling us, pro-government and out to get him at the time. And then just like this victim statement being accessed from the police and being put on this blog and everything with this girl's name, and it bothered me on so many levels, because we have treated survivors of sexual violence as if they are the perpetrators. And I think that's one of the stories that have stuck with me so long. There's another story. I cover the hospital a lot. I feel like any reporter who's been in the newsroom so long, you spend such a long time covering the hospital, different things that have happened. And there was this baby that was premature, and I promised myself I'll try to find this baby, Caroline. And after being treated for several months at the hospital, she was released, and we covered this story with her mom and the hospital. And I thought this was such a positive story to cover. There are other things that happen that are not necessarily nice, and they're not necessarily things, but there are always those stories that I think have this human touch that would always stay with me.
I know Prime News has scaled down tremendously over the years. So what has Nazima Raghubir been up to in recent time? I know that you head the Guyana Press Association, but what your work entails now, and who are you with at the moment?
Thank you so much for asking me that, because I've seen a lot of efforts to discredit me as a journalist. I've been freelancing since that downscaling in 2020. This is not new to my career. In fact, I had left Prime News as a full-time contributor to edit a magazine, and then I went back I was covering Parliament still for them, and then Ms. Johnson and I tried to resuscitate and work with Prime News locally. I'm a freelancer. The agency that I'm attached to is 𝗦𝗃𝗲𝗏𝗂. It's a wire service out of Spain, and I cover stories sometimes on the region, but more so on Guyana for that agency. And so my name wouldn't be appearing on the stories unless it's some special report. But with any wire service, they take a lot of the content and they put it out for other agencies around the world to pick up. While that's my main job, as I said, I freelance. So I've done stuff for News Source, Starbrick News locally, Capital News, more recently, and a lot of regional media houses. I am an editor for the Caribbean Investigative Journalism Network, and I actually headed an investigative team that put out a piece on survivors of sexual violence accessing justice in Guyana. And Sutland, I've done so many pieces. I am a fixer as part of my journalistic job, so I fix for a lot of international news agencies. That simply means that I organize interviews on their behalf. And these are people who know that I'm a fixer, and one person would call, do you have anybody in Guyana? And then somebody will say, yes, I have a reporter in Guyana. Her name is Nazima Raghubir. This is her contact. And then people would, So last year in particular, I've had so many fixing opportunities that I ended up having bylines on, either as a fixer or as a journalist. One of the pieces had to do with access to carbon credits, and it actually won an award in Canada. It was done by La Presse in French-Canadian territory, and the duo, the photographer and the journalist, won an award for that specific piece on Guyana. I've also organized with different agencies, ProPublica, covering the same carbon credit issues. And if you take a look at my LinkedIn page, you'll see I post a lot of the work that I've done. I've done stuff for Al Jazeera. I've done a bit of research for a lot of the leading news agencies, because they still ask for research on topics and issues that are maybe not, and documents that are not digitized. So sometimes I end up having to do a lot of that physical research here. One of the things I did a research on was on a documentary for Jim Jones, and it was released in the UK last year. In addition to so many things, sometimes I just can't remember all of the things that I've done. I'm also a media trainer. I sit on the board of the Media Institute of the Caribbean. It is the training arm of the Association of Media Workers. And under the mentorship of my friend Wesley Gibbons and Kiran Maharaj, who's the president of the Media Institute, we have been able to do so much work within the Caribbean, the regional space, on training for journalists. One of our flagship training programs is actually that investigative workshop we try to pull off annually with funds that we raise, where we train journalists on techniques for investigative reporting, whether or not it's accessing specific things, but also tools that can help them in their work, and we provide them with grants for specific stories, something that I'm very proud of. We do a lot of training on elections, investigative reporting, migration. In fact, I was part of a team that trained Bahamian journalists on reporting on migration, and I'm very proud I was able to work with them and equip them. And one of the major projects I worked with in the past 2 years is a project that has been supported by UNESCO, the Public Media Alliance, and Association of Caribbean Media Workers, and Media Institute of the Caribbean. That particular project has been dear to me because it is, the foundation for that project is a situation report we had led an investigative team on, trying to understand misinformation and disinformation in the region, and also try to work work on an inclusive media literacy project. And last year, we were able to pull off that project. In that particular project, we targeted 4 countries. Guyana was one, and I was very pleased that the Ministry of Education, hopped on it to agree to training for teachers and to give us access to 4 schools where we could talk to children about media and information literacy. And for me, it was one of the most rewarding things because I got to hear about children accessing information, what they're reading on the internet, but how themselves, because we usually think that children don't take precautions, right? But they know some of the things that, they're not supposed to do. And these were children at primary school and secondary school levels. They know the dangers of the internet and so on. And I was so proud that some of them know newspapers and they know the newscasts and they know the personalities. That was a very proud moment.
Nazima, now being both a journalist and a trainer, and the opportunity to have more than 20 years in the media, what would you say with respect to how the media landscape would have transitioned over the years?
It's interesting because a couple of things we've been discussing, even in the media literacy process, is that the world has access to even more information now. You have the internet, you have the ability to search for certain things. Yes, there are information that are possibly AI generated, but there are lots of peer review, information out there on different topics, and you identify what your credible sources are and so on. But we still find that there is a type of reluctance sometimes to inform oneself. It's not limited to the media. Like, I think it's a general trend we're dealing with across the world. And I think that has been one of the major challenges. I meet with a lot of reporters across the region, and I said, you got to read everything. I am prone to reading everything across the region. So I know what's happening in Jamaica, I know what's happening in Trinidad and Bahamas and some of the islands. I follow the international news because that is my interest. Outside of that, I'm going to read extensively on what interests me and maybe what doesn't interest me, and even what I don't like. Why? Because if I'm going to give an opinion or report on something, I want to be grounded in the facts. And I think that, I'm not like blaming or pointing fingers at anybody, but I want to encourage everybody to read a bit more. Come outside of your comfort zone and read a bit more. And I think that was, I was a reader before Prime News, but I was always encouraged that we can't be doing interviews and we don't know what we're talking about. I wanted to go to a press conference on rice prices when the late Navin Chandrapal was head of agriculture. Minister Ms. Johnson asked me what I know about the rice prices, and I didn't know anything. So I got a chance to be schooled, and then I read on, all the different trends and so on in the newspaper. And we bought all 3 of the newspaper. There was just 3 at the time, and so you had to go in the office before your 9 o'clock editorial and read the paper, the editorials, and everything else. I must confess I didn't read a lot of the sports section, but the letters to the editors, the editorial, your actual stories and so on, those were things. And I said to a young reporter the other day, she said she don't read this columnist, and I said, I can't accept that as an excuse. You have to read everybody. One, you know more than I. We don't have beats in this country. You can be sitting here with me. You're gone to the police. You gotta go down to the court. Something happened at Parliament, and that is what we deal with. You shouldn't limit yourself to just reading one set of views, one set of opinions. You have to be open to doing. And one of the most important things, and this is where I'd like to commend some of the mature journalists. I see their faces at all the trainings that we do. Why? Because they have not given up on training. They still feel that there are things that they need to learn about. And those exercises have been enriched by their presence, because when they're there, they're learning, but they're also imparting knowledge and so on, and saying, look, I used to do this, and maybe you can try this as an option to get this interview and to get this story, and so on. So I want to encourage, people, like, you're interested in having your opinions out there, you're interested in the media, let it be grounded in reading and understanding certain processes and understanding certain things before, you put an opinion out there. But also, if you're interested in the media, you must know what you're reporting on.
Now, artificial intelligence, AI, this year World Press Freedom focused on that, the team surrounding that. How do journalists navigate that artificial intelligence? Do you support it? Do you support it extensively to the extent that you become lazy and dependent on it? What advice would you provide to help journalists navigate around that, the utilization of AI tools?
One of the things I'd like to touch on in response to this question, the technology is not bad. It's what you want out of it and how you use it can enhance your work. Obviously, you can't have a total dependency on AI as we know it. We have seen the different types of AI and what they can generate, and it is obviously in response to what you're looking for and the type of content that you've put in there. But thanks to 𝗬𝗢𝗏𝗧, who has really placed this high on the agenda for us as a journalist, we can incorporate AI to enhance the work that we do. I don't expect people to have AI generated press conferences or reports or hosting of interviews and so on. And I'm saying that because Guyanese, the Caribbean people, are touchy-feely. They want to see Travis Chase on the ground. They want to hear Gordon Mosley voice. If they don't know your voice, they don't connect with that. As soon as they hear a hint of a foreign accent, and I don't believe the AI tools have been able to adequately reflect our types of different accents. So that's one thing that we have going for us. AI can be used to enhance I think data gathering, because that's something that we need to really work on as press. The types of reports sometimes we're putting out. There's so many things that happen daily, and we can start to do a little bit more data type reporting. I even believe that you can use AI to track certain trends and certain stories, especially if you have an interest in maybe a beat or something that you really don't have the time to follow up with daily, but you can, have a weekly accumulation, maybe trends in a particular technology, or maybe crime reporting, women reporting on women, gender issues, and so on. And so I honestly do believe it can be used to enhance that type of reporting. I would like to say to journalists, just remember that you have to make a connection with your interviewee and your audiences, and stay away from AI-generated questions and content that you could look at it and see that it's AI. Guyanese have a way and a knack for, you have to have the Guyanese touch and flair, and they like that connection. And I'm saying that because I can't go to on the road and say, hello, how are you doing? So there's this tapestry that AI use for everything. They're always using that word. Somebody can look at me and there was a Rastafarian man I interviewed many years ago as a young reporter. I always remember, I walk in and I know I wanted to interview him, and I already feel he's standoffish, and I said, "Oh, going on, Bano?" And he told me after the interview, I had no reason for call this man Bano other than I wanted he to talk to me, right? And he said, it's because I saw going on Bano, he talked to me, right? So we still have a lot of good things that we can do. And I want to encourage, because AI doesn't do this for you. I spent a lot of time at the National Archives doing research and so on, and looking at different things. And these are the things we got to do. Our records aren't digitized as yet, but spend some time looking at these things and, informing yourself, differently, and then use AI for other things that I feel that can enhance your career.
You're serving your second term as the president of the Guyana Press Association. Has it been challenging for you?
Interesting. The second term, no. To get here, the road to get here, was very interesting. I had not planned to go back for re-election 2 years ago, and I think we're just around the anniversary of that time. But a group of my colleagues had approached me and said, Nazima, could you reconsider? You have done so much, and I think, you have a lot more to do. And it was because of that and the support that I got at the time, because people would messaging me at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure, you're running? Are you running? Because I want to come to the elections. I just want to know that you're running. And so that support, I think, has really helped me to manage any challenging expectation. I have a very good executive who's been very supportive. It's not just about me. And, that core support from the people that we represent is even more encouraging, because a lot of people don't know, like behind the scene, people would call and say, can you give me some advice on this? Can you assist with this? Can the Press Association do this? We don't talk about these things publicly. Some of them are very personal, some of them are professional development, and we do a lot of this behind the scenes. And all of the people involved in the Guyana Press Association do this voluntary, and as a commitment they make within that 2 years. And for that, I think that has really equal out any challenging aspect. We expected the last 2 years to be a little bit more focused on more training, because that has been a flagship of the Guyana Press Association for a very long time. However, the access to funding has proven to be more challenging over the last 2 years than we thought. And I mean, I've not given up on that. We've had some amazing training, like we had particular training with the the judiciary, that involved the Chancellor, the Chief Justice, several judges, and we were able to pull off several other trainings after. There is the Caribbean Media Summit, which will be held at the end of, 23rd and 24th, which is of May, which is supported by the Caribbean Media Institute and the University of Guyana, along with several other partners. And I think that is also a major training opportunity for journalists. So on that front, definitely I think we've been able to do some things. Representation for media workers, as I mentioned, not a lot of it is public advocacy and all of that. We have had some very alarming trends in recent times. There's a lot of cyberbullying of journalists, particularly women, and we've been able to flag some of that. And also, there are a couple of issues where there's been aggression towards media workers. A lot of this has happened from the politicians on both sides. And how they treat media workers. And I think that's been an ongoing trend that we've been able to identify and raise. And, there are also issues where some media workers have been vilified. There's one case where a media worker was vilified by her former boss in one of the most absurd and, I dare say nasty ways. And again, I have to say, I don't know if it's a gender thing, but here she was, being called out for her opinion and all of that. And those are things that, are very bothersome, because other people can see these types of things and think it's okay that they can do this to media workers, or they can, attack them in a certain way. We've also seen trends where there were some threats and attacks the Travis Chase incident and so on, I think is also very worrying, and things that we've been able to at this point just keep an eye on and advise you know, some media workers on and how to deal with.
You've spoken about bullyism, attempts to bully journalists, and we've seen consistently the Vice President, Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, he would have called you out as a PPP hater. Are you a PPP hater? And the attacks have, in a way, have spread to social media. I've seen certain Facebook pages personally attacking you. Could you respond to those attacks?
I am a journalist and I have work to do. I really don't, I can't say that I don't care, because you know, Mr. Jagdeo has his own opinions and all of that. I have a job to do. I am very grateful that people in this country continue to talk to me, and I can go anywhere in this country and citizens and Guyanese talk to me, and that's what I'll say to that. And I just wanted to say, because you know, people have painted different news agencies with different political colors. I'm not going to say, you know, it's right or wrong. People can have their own opinions. I think my work speaks for itself, because at the end of the day, I am able to cover the country, cover the news, represent the citizens in a different way through my stories, and I think that is all that matters.
Okay, but how do you navigate? I mean, aside from being a journalist, you're a mother, all right? How does it affect you on a personal level?
I have not allowed it to distort what I'm supposed to do. I'm not saying I'm not cognizant of, you know, some of the things that have been said. A lot of it is very racist. In fact, one of the trends I've seen over the past couple of years is to attack my biracial relationship. I share a partnership with an Afro-Guyanese man, and apparently that's still very offensive to some people. So I'm not going to say that, you know, it's not in my peripherals or so on. Obviously, as my kids grow, I have my niece with me and my son. I know they're going to hear things and they're going to see things, and we'll have to have ongoing discussions, you know, with them. And it's interesting, because I think why I've been able to ensure that I focus on my work is because of the support I get at home, my colleagues in the media, citizens, people who, when they hear something, I don't think Mr. Jagdeo understands what he does every time he mentions my name, because some Thursday mentioning me name Friday gone in Stabrook Market, everybody they're clapping and cheering me on, and you know, telling me to go my back. I walking on the road, people you know shouting support on the internet, and so on. And I think it's things like that that really reassures me that I still have a lot of work to do, and I still have the respect and support of citizens. I must mention, it's also very important for my family. My mother is very much, you know, updated on current affairs, and she would look at the Vice President's press conference, I think, like a lot of people in the country. And I remember after some remark recently, which I missed, but she heard when I walk in, she said, you know, my mother used to go with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 when he come to Unity, because that's where she is. And she said, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this nonsense, you know. And, you know, I met people who said, you know, in family members, like, what is going on with this type of thing? I can't answer that. All I know is that I have work to do, and I am appreciative of the support that I've gotten from the public to be able to do that work.
You've spoken a bit about the state of the media, and I got that you were referencing to the recent Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Day Index report. And that report touched on many things. It spoke about a lot of journalists, in a sense, or reporters transitioning to entities that are pro-government or state media, because why? The state media apparently pays better than independent media outlets. So they spoke about ads and how ads are shared across the media landscape. They spoke about attacks on journalists, in particular female journalists. And they spoke about politicians deciding who they would speak to because you're aligned, or they view you, not that you're aligned, but that because they have a perception of you and perceive you to be X, Y, and Z, they decide that, you know, I'm not going to speak to you. I'm not going to take this question. I'm going to, when I ask a question, I'm going to respond in a particular way. What are your thoughts on that report and all that was shared in it?
I think that particular report continues, like I think the RSF continues to monitor media trends all across the country, including, you know, Guyana, the Caribbean, and so on. The things identified are the realities we're facing in the media. A lot of our media workers are not enticed in a way to come into the media because, you know, it's not the best paying job. And of course, they're seeing you know, other jobs that pay them better, but also jobs where they're not the targets of, you know, any type of ridicule, because not everybody can handle, you know, the types of abuses that are meted out to media workers. It can get very personal and stuff like that. And I think that is something that we have to deal with. There's also the issue of, and I feel like these are real issues. I see somebody today, and I know where that letter's coming from, debating the RSF methodology and all of that, when that same person contributed so many times to that same methodology. But, you know, there are other trends that include the type of undermining of the economic viability of media houses. And this is not one party doing. I've seen both parties, you know, try to do this and do this effectively in the past. And that is also a real issue. And sometimes I wonder about the private sector, because while the media heavily depends on state ads, we also need the private sector to support. And still today, people are calling you to say, yes, I can support X, but you can't put my logo or pay my ads because I can't really be aligned with y'all. I mean, people got to come to front and own, you know, supporting a vibrant media. You know, what is really standing up for something that you believe in, and a free media should be one of those things. And those are real challenges. And also the lack of access remains something that really I think would affect how we're ranked and so on. We know for years now, it's almost going on to 5 years, we've had no post-cabinet press briefing, which is an important fixture in building the government's relationship with the press. Yes, the vice president has his press conferences. I've noticed for the last 2 or 3 months it has been, as general secretary of the party, something Starbrick News has identified over and over again. Some ministers of government are accessible. In the lead up to the referendum, we had access to Foreign Affairs Minister Todd for many interviews and many engagements and so on. But outside of that, there's so many other things that, you know, public officials, not even only ministers, but your PSs and your other people that should be able to talk to us, you know, on so many issues. And I think that is the tightening of, you know, that is something that obviously would affect the type of ranking that we have seen. And then again, the employment of the internet, and it's not only the internet, it's some of those social media commentators that attack in some of the most vile ways. It's not even constructive criticism, media workers and media houses. And so that seemed to be a trend, and all of these obviously seem to have an effect on where we are. I think we are still at a point where we can build better relationships with the powers that be, with a lot of the institutions and so on that are there. I think there's still a chance at that. And Svetlana, what was troublesome about that is that the political parties all seem to play from the same handbook when it comes to how they will treat the media. Some of them may be masking it right now because, they can deal with it differently and, they're all nice and so on. And then you find when they get into government is, another story. And then you're still seeing my state media colleagues in particular sometimes are targeted by some of the opposition party members because, as soon as you identify that you're from Guyana Chronicle is an issue, you've worked at the Guyana Chronicle, more than me how that is viewed, and I see that sometimes that is unnecessary. Yes, you may not agree with something or whatever. None of them are not expected to be in agreement with questions we're asking, but this is your opportunity to defend your position, defend whatever, without being so hostile.
You've spoken about a letter published with regards to the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Day Index report. But has the GPA received reports, complaints from journalists on the ground about the treatment meted out to them? And how frequent are those reports?
We receive reports regularly from journalists about either bullying or hostile questioning and so on. And we have developed a sort of a, not a response mechanism. We've asked people to document their reports to us. And I think some people were offended initially when we asked them to put it in writing. Why we have done that is because there was a trend where people would complain to us, and when we raised the issue, either publicly or with the entity, they would say, they didn't want it to go this far, and whatever. Or there's also some amount of reaction to that person or entity. And we've had people who have written us formally and said, look, this is the issue we're having and so on. Many of times we don't respond. We respond to the complainant, but we don't actively put out a statement on it because we're accumulating whatever are the trends and the sort of actions. So in fact, last year we did put out a lengthy statement on all the reports that we've had of a period from both state media and private entities, reporters who had raised issues with us, and we list them. We listed the date. We listed what were the complaints and so on. And there were some other complaints that come in after that we hadn't put out anything as yet, but will be dealt with. Yes, and there are people who say, well, I'm not going to write anything, but I'm going to let you know that this is what is happening. I can't go on the record and say this because I'll be targeted. This is what's going to happen, and I don't feel comfortable with this being made public, but I just thought I'd let you know. So those are the things that are happening, and this is not something new to us. We've actually over the years had I won't say complaints, but there are instances where people from the state media could not attend training that the GPA is putting on, or if they do attend an event, they were told that, they say no photographs of me here, and stuff like that. And I think people generally sometimes don't show up because, look, they don't want any issues, being raised, asking them, why they're at this event or whatever. So those are still realities that, we have to live with. In fact, when we had our elections a couple years ago, a couple of our colleagues called and said, I don't think we can make it, because this is the reality. If I go there, they will ask me why I'm here, and tell me to vote a certain way. So you've had to deal with things like that. Outside of complaints though, like people have reached out to raise like general issues affecting them. Sometimes it's labor related, sometimes it's personal. So we're not a union, so I try as best as possible to align them with persons who can assist them. So one of the complaints we had recently is labor related, and I promised the person to have a lawyer pro bono, try to advise them on that. We've had a couple of issues of personal types of assault and other types of assault in which we had offered assistance, yes, counseling, and that was, we had a small amount of money specifically for therapy, and we had utilized a lot of that money for one case that we had to deal with last year. So we do have stuff like that. We do have colleagues also who've been affected by different issues. Our colleague recently was affected by a fire and lost all his earthly possessions, and his family has affected, and so on. And we stepped in to try to mobilize support for him. So there are lots of other positive things that are happening, and we hear about, or we tend to. And I must say this again, it's not me doing it. I have an entire executive that supports, and also there are a lot of the veterans who would say, why y'all don't do this? Or, I've heard this, can you investigate? Can you, GPA, do you have a position on this? Stuff like that. And those are things that have, been really helpful to us.
Recently, we've seen the president on World Press Freedom. They had a brunch, and he spoke about many things, including putting out there the need possibly for redefining the media here in Guyana. What are your thoughts on that as we prepare to wrap up?
So I am appreciative that, the president, the head of state, the minister of public information, and so on, was able to do the brunch to engage with media workers. I think President Ali has a very hands-on approach, and is very, the type of person he is, he's going to go around, talk to everybody, greet them, hear what they got to say, and so on. And I think that is his style, and it's much appreciated. And the fact that the government has been able to do the brunch again, which had been missing for a few years, shows a level of commitment to engagement. I'd also like to thank the government for recognizing the media workers who are there, and to see the women. 𝗬𝗂𝗁 has been, an editor for such a long time. You don't have a lot of women in those leading positions in media houses, and I think, it's commendable. I saw a technical person, Ron Robinson, and so on, Marano Isaacs, who has also been a fixture in broadcasting. We had our own recognition, and I think it's important, as I said when we did it, to recognize our media workers, and let people, see who these faces are, see who are the people who are behind news. And this is my response to your question. News, the press, the media, the type of information that comes to us, and the different mechanisms that we use to ensure that information is credible, and the way that we put it together, it's a unique training, it's a unique experience that you have to have when you're dealing with public information and information in general for public consumption. the people like 𝗬𝗂𝗏 and so on would know this more than a lot of people, that when information come, especially highly sensitive information, there is the three-source rule for you to ensure that there are credible people confirming this type of information, the mills of fact-checking that you put that through, you know, the type of research that goes into a proper story, ensuring that you have balance and, you know, you have people's names right, locations, you know what you're talking about and so on. And, you know, that is what really defines what press and media is. So when I heard about this redefinition of media, it is alarming that we're heading down this road to redefine or to attempt to redefine what media is when we have a very specific role and we have different skill sets to deal with certain things. The media in Guyana is obviously it has evolved over time. You had the introduction of the print press way beyond our time, at a time when people were still selling enslaved Africans and other property in 3 different counties that had them creating their own printed materials for distribution. You had the introduction of radio much later, centuries after. You had the introduction of television and then online and so on. And so the media has evolved, but one thing I think has stayed a main fixture in news and press is how we acquire information and the processes to disseminate that information. Nazima Raghubir is not going to say that 𝗬𝗢𝗏𝗏 is wearing a black dress, because I have to examine all the different elements to show that 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 is wearing a specific color and present that to the media and to build that trust, because a lot of people still have a very specific trust in certain agencies and news and so on. I talked about my mother, who is on social media. Thankfully, she doesn't share things wildly, but her fact-checking mechanism is that she still listens to the news, and she listens to all of the news, right? So it's very worrying to hear you know, what we've heard, and you know, seeing this being supported as some sort of trend. I am here, and I'll always support people's right for expression and, of course, freedom of the press, which is not enshrined in our Constitution as yet, but freedom of expression is. So I still believe there's a role for other people who are in this information or communication environment. At the time when I joined the media, there were the talk show hosts who operated with no types of rules, and it was very different from what we did at the media. But we have certain ethical principles to follow. There are certain things that are different, you know, from the way that we follow. And to take from your news agency, for instance, News Source, when you look, I've seen, I think it was last year, a year before the last, where there was a report, when there was a helicopter crash, and the report quoted there were news reports that quoted somebody that said, you know, survivors had been found, and some other thing, I can't remember, all the survivors were accounted for. But obviously, News Source did what it had to do, and that report was not published hastily. News Source had to get all their facts, and they employed the time, and they were not competing to put out fuss and this and that. And they actually published what turned out to be the right report, and even catapulted them into a more credible agency where people said, okay, well, this is the correct report. And you see, that is important. You want to build that trust. You want, more than ever, reporters should opt to be credible. This is the time. This is the time where people should say credible reporting is this person, this person, this person, this person, because they can see you've done the groundwork, you've done the research, you take your time and you go and get the accurate information.
Finally, Nazima, this year is an election year, and so we're expected constitutionally to have elections later this year, I think by November or thereabout. Briefly, what tips would you offer journalists listening with regards to reporting coverage of the elections?
One, join the Guyana Press Association as a member, because you need to be supportive of the press body. Access the training, especially when we do elections training. I'm hoping that the next executive has this high of a priority on his list. And the other thing is, you will need to understand elections through the law and what is available. From the Representation of the People's Act to all the other pieces of legislation, our main law that governs everything, our Constitution and so on. Get a copy of the Constitution. These things are available thanks to the AG. A whole lot of legislation, old acts, new acts, are available on the AG's office website. These are easier for you to read. You don't gotta do a reading in one go. You can read something today, internalize it, try to understand it and so on, and then you go back and read. There are a number of rulings on different elections that are available. Also read those things to understand. If you know you're going to be covering elections, understand how polls are administered in Guyana, how people vote, you know, what they're expected to do and all of that. And we have a number of reports on elections from different observer groups. So read those. They're very specific recommendations and observations on media. And you know, they're very useful. So if you're gonna be, even if you're not gonna be involved in covering elections, just read up and try to understand you know, what the coverage is. And I must say, I had observed elections in Pakistan and recently Trinidad and Tobago for Commonwealth, and I got a chance to see how the media operate in these two different territories. One, a territory with millions of people and hundreds and hundreds of media workers, and you know, where access to information, you know, is a thing, and there are real threats and physical violence against media workers. And one where media houses and media workers operate in a less hostile environment, and you know, have been able to do their jobs and report on. One of the common things in that is that people, before reporting in both of these places, inform themselves as much as possible on everything related to the system, the actual polling day, the actual results declaration, and things like that. Elections is one of my most exciting times. I like to remind journalists that is the time we all wear black, because you're not supposed to wear any and every color, attending press conference, covering rallies. And even the 𝗬𝗏𝗏, well, if 𝗬𝗏𝗏 has press conferences, but on elections day and so on, ensure that you have your badges that clearly identify you. If you feel a situation is threatening, you go in a group. You always insulate yourself and go in a media group and so on. And try to assess the situation before you get there to understand what is it you're covering and so on. Also be very careful with the rallies not to repeat libelous comments and defamatory comments from, you know, coming from the podium. But also try to analyze the trends. Try to talk to people attending some of the rallies. That's where the real stories usually are. And you know, try to observe things because people love the color. People love to read the color. One of the things I personally like to do is get my hands on the list. Nomination day is always very good to cover. Like if you're a reporter, nomination is the place you want to be because you get that sort of energy and you get to talk to the candidates and so on. And then the actual polling day, my colleague Dennis Shabral likes to walk around Georgetown all the time, every day I'm told. But around elections time, he would go to the polling stations because the list, the declaration is posted outside of the polling stations where you can actually do your own analysis and say, okay, this Albertown primary school has this one here got this, okay, I'm getting an idea of the trends from this particular area. I know reporters for some media houses still do that. So, you got to ground yourself in the foundation for, coverage for elections and take a go at it. I think it's a very good experience to cover elections.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Nazima Raghubir. Nazima, I want to personally thank you for all that you do. You supported me throughout my career. I could always call Nazima up and ask her for advice on any issue. And I know my colleagues, they do the same. So Nazima, continue to do the excellent work. I know that you're working with the MIC and other regional media bodies, doing great things. And as a Commonwealth observer, wow, that's a big one. Congratulations, and stay doing what you're doing. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Sources. I've been your host, 𝗦𝗢𝗨𝗥𝗖𝗘𝗦. Stay well.